Quick warning. Some of the story was told to me by my friend's mom since I was too young and didn't really understand the situation. I was probably about 7 to 10 in this story. It was early summer and my mom basically shoved me outside. I went over to my neighbors and got my best friend AJ. We were honestly weird kids, so we were going around with a bucket collecting BB pellets from the ground. If you don't know what I mean, then I'm sorry. After about an hour or so, a car pulled up into the parking lot we were in. I was a very naive kid and thought everyone was nice, so don't judge me too harshly on this. The guy got out and started walking over to us. I smiled and waved because a lot of people come and go from this lot. He reached us and started with, "Hi guys, I'm James. What are y'all doing?" AJ was very social, and he started talking this guy's ear off. "Oh, I saw some by my car. Let's go get them. Major red flag." Let me repeat myself. I'm a very naive kid, but we followed him. "So, when are y'all gonna be in the middle school?" He gestured to the building this parking lot belonged to. Again, major red flag. Honestly, I don't remember how we responded. By this point, we reached his car. We picked up the pellets and he started going through his car for some reason. Looking back, I seriously questioned what he was doing, but I think AJ's mom had been watching the entire time while he was over there and deciding to call for us. We ran to her when she called us, and he rushed off to leave. Apparently she had called the cops with his info, warning about a sketchy guy. She told me when I asked about this recently that he was looking around constantly, and tried multiple times to duck from the cameras and move out of sight when people were walking past. There was a lot of traffic in this area, just people walking back and forth. So a couple of days later, Rachel, AJ's mom, was watching the news. A story about 2 girls who were kidnapped weeks prior from us getting saved had just come on the TV. When a picture of the kidnapper came on, me and AJ were walking into the living room. "Oh hey, AJ, look, James is on TV." Rachel freaked out, told us to go play upstairs, and she called the cops. He was released a couple weeks ago, and that reminded me of the story. I hope I never see him again, because I don't know what I would do. The story takes place in Ireland. I was staying with my dad as I usually do on the weekends. My dad is married to my stepmom. She is a nice person, and together they have 2 children. I'm going to use their nicknames in this story. Sorry if that seems a bit silly or out of place, but hey, I'm Irish. We live to be silly. The oldest, which was Hare, at the time of the story he was 5. Catcher was about 3 at the time of the story. If you're wondering about the nicknames and where they came from, the story of how they came about would have involved me telling you my brother's names. The way my family goes for trick-or-treating is that my dad will drive us to the edge of the estate and walk us around. This year he had decided that me and my sister were old enough to just look after them ourselves. He drove us to the edge of the estate. My sister, she doesn't have a nickname, but she decided to take Catcher, so I took Hare. They went left while we went right. Both of my brothers had a little pumpkin bucket. It was orange and had a black mouth and 2 black eyes. The handle was also black. We went to a few different houses. After a while, we ended up going to one house. You can imagine my horror when we get there, and the old lady gives my brother an apple. To my surprise, he actually said thank you when we left. He honestly had more willpower than I thought. A few houses later, we come across this next weird house. So we go up to the door, and my brother was about to knock. But I heard something. "Wait," I said. It sounded like a woman. Her voice was muffled. I couldn't tell what was going on. It sounded like she was laughing. But then I realized that kind of laugh it was. I didn't want to have my brother knock on a door that I knew the person inside was busy or having fun. "Come on," I said. "There's no one here." "But you didn't check," he said. I argued my point, and soon after, we were off. But I kept thinking about it and thinking about what I heard. Why was that woman being so loud? After a while, we were done. My brother's bucket was full. Although I had done everything in my power to make sure that this didn't happen too fast. I'll skip all the boring stuff until about 2 days later. I was at my grandparents' house, and I heard my granddad say, "Did you hear about one of your women who were killed up in the estate?" He said this to my granny. I asked him about it, and he said that it was in the local paper. Some woman was stabbed to death on Halloween. The killer would have probably gotten away with it too, for a while longer at least. But he had done a bad job covering up her mouth from all the screaming that she was doing, and that you could hear it outside. The father of a child who had gone to the door called the police. The thing is, he did this about 15 minutes after we were there. This leads me to believe that her death was slow and painful. This makes me feel so much worse, to be honest. I could have done something, but my dirty mind thought that she was just having some fun. And now I have to live with this. The murder made it onto the local news, but not even on mainstream. That's the one part that I really think is fucked up. Because what if he's still out there? What if they didn't catch him? These are all questions that I still have to this day. This isn't my story, but it's a fellow nurse of mine. We worked together and she told me I could tell you. We were talking about a patient's hallucinations when he told us about this time that he was walking past the patient's room. An elderly woman with dementia, and she was chatting up a storm with someone. He asked her who she was talking to, and the woman replied, "That nice man in the black and white striped shirt. He's sitting right there." We didn't really think anything of it. We looked over, there was no one. There was no visitors during those hours. So a while later, he went into another patient's room with dementia, and a different patient asked where the man in the striped shirt had gone. We were very upset about this, and we started thinking and looking at the cameras, but nothing was there. We never saw anything on the feeds or anything like that. Whatever they were talking about. It's kind of weird that two people with dementia both have the same idea. Neither one of them talk to each other. This is what honestly scares me. We haven't had an update about any of this. None of the other nurses have talked about this yet. But when they do, we will tell them our story. The summer after I graduated from high school, I left work early and went up to my parents' cabin in northern Michigan. Spent that night at the beach, watching the sunset. Once the sun went down, it became nearly pitch black. There was no light population whatsoever. I got to my car and started driving down the highway, which was M22. After about 10 seconds of being at speed, there was an older Tahoe, late 90s, that started riding my ass and flashing his high beams. So I got up to about 60 in a 45. They were still on my ass. I pulled off to the side road that my parents' cabin is off of, and they took the same turn. I thought this seemed a little weird, because there's only about 30 to 40 houses on this road completely. So I went all the way down, which is usually a dead end, but leads to a maintenance area for a golf course nearby. The truck was still following me. At this point, I'm freaking out because if I pulled up to my house, they'd know exactly where I lived, and they were still following close by. I took a ton of turns, just random ones, and the truck followed every single one. It was like this for about 15 minutes. I finally had the chance to take a turn with traffic going through an intersection, and it gave me a few seconds of a head start. I pulled down a side street and went up 100 yards, turned off all my lights, and I waited. The truck slowly drove by the perpendicular street and kept going. That was my chance, so I booked it home, pulled my car around the side, away from the main road, ran inside and pulled the curtain closed. For an 18-year-old, I was scared as hell that night. I waited up a little bit longer, and I just watched out the window, hoping and praying that he wasn't going to come back. People might think that this was possibly just a coincidence, but if you don't know how many times I turned and how many roads I went down, trust me, this was very fucking scary. I was going down an old country highway in northwest Georgia on my motorcycle, which was a 750 Vulcan, when I spotted an ambulance coming the opposite way. I pulled over and a pickup truck pulled over behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw this passenger grab a baseball bat and started hustling my way. I didn't even look, just dropped into gear and I hauled ass. What followed was the most horrifying experience I've ever had in my life, as this pickup truck proceeds to just chase me all over the fucking place for about 20 minutes. I'm unfamiliar with this area, and my bike was not meant to go fast around turns like this, so I've got no room for error. It's all I can do to stay out in front of these guys. I'm blowing through these four-way intersections, and I'm just hoping that I can get some distance in between and come up with a plan. But they are hell-bent on catching me, and I don't know why. I finally managed to get pointed towards the highway and into the cover of other cars, but the traffic stop on the bridge, that's where I messed up. The truck is 3 car lengths behind me, and I'm thinking if I can get out to this highway, I'm probably able to get away, scot-free, because my Vulcan is pretty fast in a straight line. But in my mirror, I could see that passenger snaking through these cars on the bridge. So I lane split, which is illegal in Georgia, but I didn't care, and make the on-ramp, hammer down, and I'm just fucking gone. I never went back into that town. As far as I know, this was just an unprovoked attack. Maybe like some hillbilly variety or something was trying to get up with me. Because prior to that, I didn't even see any other vehicle other than the ambulance. I don't ride particularly fast, and I don't believe in loud pipes. I got lucky as hell. Seeing him come up behind me like that will always scare the shit out of me. It was already dark and I was trying to drive home from my friend's wedding. I was listening to my favorite music and tired of driving this stretch. I was crossing the highway. I started noticing my car's speed drop, even though I didn't even press the brakes. I pressed the accelerator, but nothing happened. The speed dropped quickly, even though it wasn't a climb. First, I thought that there might be a problem in my car, but I realized that a week before, I had done the service on the car. While I was driving, I was drained. I was so drained from the full day of celebrating, but that wasn't it. I was hallucinating because of that. I could clearly remember that I was alone in the car, and suddenly I saw a man sitting in the back seat with kids beside him. I remember their faces. He was an average-looking guy, had a beard, wearing a gray shirt. He was looking sad and was bleeding. They both had cuts on their face. I saw him from my rearview mirror and looked at them as if he was asking for help. I was honestly surprised, thinking that maybe I had stopped somewhere, but I didn't, neither giving anybody a lift. I haven't stopped the car or done anything. But how did they end up in my car? Maybe they might somehow have just entered my car when it was parked, but who knows? When I saw again, there was no one. To my shock and surprise, there was no one back there. My heart almost came out. I honestly thought that it would have been better if there was just somebody playing a prank on me. But when I looked back there, they were just gone. I would have honestly dropped that person anywhere they wanted to go. I was so damn serious. But nonetheless, he was just gone, I guess. All of them. Still to this day, I'm not getting this whole situation out of my head. This incident really did happen to me. But then it was not over. I was coming out of this phase that I was going through. And then suddenly I saw the same person and the kids on a cycle beside my car. I got a shock. How could a cycle be beside me, going over 40 kilometers an hour? They came to my front door window and stared at me, but this time I was just frozen. It was so shocking that I forgot that I was driving the car, and I almost lost control. I finally recollected myself after a little bit, and saw what I was doing and got a hold of it. I started taking God's name, and then they vanished right in front of me. It was a mess this entire journey, and I could clearly listen to my heart sound just beating out of my chest. I could feel it in my ears. They were ringing. Till I reached home, I didn't stop taking God's name in vain. I still have goosebumps thinking about this incident. I still feel shivers while driving. I can't explain to people without them just thinking it's a joke. They just don't understand because they've never gone through this. I thank God for saving me that day. Just the thought that you can hallucinate like this, just from sleep deprivation or being completely fucking tired. It'll never make sense. It's wild what vision can really do when you lack sleep. A family of 7 with a driver traveling to their native place in an SUV. It was very late early morning, 1:30 a.m. Half of the family slept. Only the driver, father, and son were awake. Then they came through this desert area. Only their car was passing by it. Suddenly the driver saw a white thing glowing in the middle of the road, far away. As they reached near it, they got a clear glimpse of it. It was a lady in white. The driver and the father have been listening to many stories about this road, that a ghost of a woman haunts the road. The father tells the driver not to slow down. Whatever it is, don't slow down the car. As they reached near, the car passed through it. Passed right through the lady. As they looked behind, the lady was still standing there. Didn't even make eye contact with the vehicle. The father, the son, and the driver were all just terrified of what they just encountered with this, I guess you could say, ghost. The driver was sweating and scared. The father then asked the driver what was the matter and the story of the ghost. The driver then told them the story. There was a family of 3 that lived in a village nearby. The village was a very strange, unorthodox place. They had a ritual that if the husband dies, then the woman needs to burn herself till death. Her husband died and the woman refused to burn herself, as her children were small and she needed to take care of them. The villagers got very angry and they decided to burn her. She came to learn about her fate, and she took her child into her arms and started running down the road. But 2 people caught her and they burned the woman to death in the middle of the road and took her child away to the village and threw him in the woman's house and burned the house as well. From then the people have been talking about a ghost that haunts that road in search of her missing child. The father and son were so blown away that they just completely ignored it and didn't tell anybody else in the vehicle about it. They kept it to themselves. They felt like that would be the best thing to do and continued the drive. Jerry was driving home late one night when he saw a young lady waiting at a bus stop. He stopped his car and told her that he doesn't think that the buses are running so late at night and offered her a ride. The fall night air was getting chilly, so he took off his jacket and gave it to her. Jerry found out the girl's name was Mary and she was on her way home. After an hour's drive, they arrived at her home and he dropped her off by the front door. Jerry said goodnight and went home himself. The next day he remembered that Mary had his jacket still. He drove back to her house and knocked on the door, and an old woman answered. Jerry told her about the ride that he had given her daughter Mary, and he had come back to grab the jacket that he had lent her. The old woman looked so confused. Then Jerry noticed a picture of Mary above the fireplace mantel. He pointed to it and told the old woman that that was the girl he had given a ride to. With her voice shaking, the old woman told Jerry that her daughter had been dead for many years and was buried in the cemetery about an hour's drive away from here. Jerry ran to his car and drove to the cemetery. That's when he found his jacket neatly folded on top of the grave. The name on the gravestone was Mary. There is a bus stop at Upper Alginate Road that I'm told is haunted. For non-Singapore residents, Upper Alginate Road sits between two cemeteries, a Christian one on one side and a Muslim one on the other. Why do I say it's haunted? Well, I've been in many taxis, and when taxi drivers are talkative, they most likely will tell you the story when you ask them about the ghostly encounters. Yes, many taxi drivers who have passed this road have experienced some phenomenon one time or another. They say if you travel to the Upper Alginate Road between midnight and 4 a.m., and only if you are lucky, you will see a beautiful young woman with a baby in her arms. One time there was an ignorant taxi driver who happened to pick her up. She boarded the taxi and just pointed ahead without saying a word. So, the driver drove on ahead. After some minutes, he asked her where she wanted to go, but she smiled and instructed him with a hand gesture just to go straight ahead. Upper Alginate Road stretches quite a distance. So when the taxi approached the end of it, at the junction, he asked her again where exactly she wanted to go. She replied with, "Going home." He was a little annoyed with what she replied with, and made an impatient remark, which translated to, "Yes, I know you want to go home, but where the heck is home? Gosh, you're giving me such a hard time." She was hurt and started sobbing. Feeling guilty, he apologized, and then asked her gently what her address was. She then asked to be taken back to the place she boarded his taxi at. The irate driver was furious and made an angry sharp U-turn and headed back to the spot that he picked her up from. He could not keep his anger in, and soon was nagging away. As he was busy nagging, he failed to realize that she was no longer seated in the back seat. When he finally looked into the back mirror, he was horrified that she was gone. Then the smell of a sweet frangipani began to fill the cab. If you don't know what that is, it's the flower associated with death. His hands began to tremble, and he felt chilled to the bones. Without another thought, he sped off and out of the Upper Alginate Road. He never traveled along that road after midnight again since this experience. Other taxi drivers have also picked up this woman with a child, but had different experiences with her. Someone realized immediately after she came aboard that she was a ghost. Some would not even notice anything strange until they smelled the sweet scent of the frangipani. Before you read my story, just know that this is possibly the scariest, creepiest thing that has happened to me or anyone around me. I'm still in denial to this day, but go ahead and read this. My cell phone rang and I said hello. I answered my phone so enthusiastic. "Hey, is this Sarah?" some guy asked. It sure is. But after hearing his voice, my enthusiasm was somewhat suppressed. Who may I ask is calling? My name is Jay. Just the letter J, not J-A-Y, just J. I saw on Craigslist that you were looking for a room. I actually have something for a single woman if you're interested at all. Would you mind coming to my place today? He spoke with a dull voice that had an eerie weirdness to it. Maybe it was because his lungs were filled with tar, because he was obviously a smoker. I was reluctant to answer back after hearing his murky voice, but then I thought it would be safer to ask, "Are you in the San Diego area? Because that's where I work." I sure am. But he still had a gloomy tone in his voice. Would you like me to send you pictures of the place? Of course. I definitely knew a picture text would help me determine if I really wanted to be in that place or if it was right to suit me. I just didn't know if he would be the right roommate for me. Instantly, he sent me 5 pictures of this enormous estate. It was gigantic, with an infinity pool, a hot tub, and a colossal-sized room. The windows overlooked the Pacific Ocean. This place looked more like a mansion of Beverly Hills than a typical San Diego suburban house. I was at Starbucks. I'm not a rich gal, so I was hoping that the rent would be around maybe like $800 per month. I sent him a text. I forgot to ask you, Jay, how much is rent? Then he sent me a video text of the backyard. He spun a full 360, which showed me a panoramic view of the entire backyard. But what sounded odd was, he said, "This place doesn't look like where a serial killer would live, does it?" With a creepy tone in his voice. When he said it, it honestly gave me goosebumps from head to toe. I didn't know why someone would just say something like that. He texted me, I could do $500 per month. The place looked phenomenal. Any person would love to live here. I thought, wow, this was a real steal. I replied to the text, "When's a good time to come check it out? Can I come check out the place?" He instantly replied back and said, "Why don't you come right now? I'm available right now." I had to be at work at 6 p.m. until 10 p.m., and it was 30 minutes till 6. So I replied back, "I'm sorry, Jay. I don't think I'm able to really go today. I have to head to work." He replied back with, "Okay, well, I have someone else coming right now. It's going to be a first come, first serve, but thanks anyway." I was honestly bummed out. I called my work hoping that maybe I could just get somebody to cover my shift. Luckily, I was in luck though. I talked to my manager and he said that he'd cover me. The place was honestly hidden up in the hills. It was about 30 minutes of a drive from my Starbucks. Ideally, I would have liked a little bit closer to my job, but I also would rather be living in a mansion, if I'm honest. My current apartment was moldy and had bugs, and it was really run down. So I was really looking forward to moving ASAP. I texted Jay, "Hey, I'm on the way." I thought it was quite odd that he texted his name only with the letter J and not Jay. You know, like Jay Leno. He sent me a text. "Text me when you're about 5 minutes away." I texted back, 5 minutes. My phone indicated that I was 8 minutes away. But usually when I drive faster, I get to the destination a little bit quicker than the set time. Great, see you soon. The San Diego hills were outstandingly gorgeous. The drive up to Jay's mansion was magnificent and very rural with twisty roads. My GPS on my phone alerted me, "You have arrived to your destination." I arrived to the gate, and it was one of those big iron-looking ones. Like it had a keypad and everything. The driveway was honestly, if I had to guess, like a quarter-mile long. It had a giant estate. It was enormous. As I drove up to the mansion, I saw a man standing outside. He was wearing blue jeans and a black leather jacket, and he was standing beside a rusty old Toyota pickup. And it didn't really match the $3 million looking estate. I rolled down my window and asked, "Hey, are you Jay?" He waved at me with a huge creepy smile and said, "Yes, that's me." His voice sounded sinister and demonic. Even more in person, honestly. He approached my car and opened my driver's side door. And my engine was still running. "Is it okay if I park over here?" It seemed odd that he just rushed to get me out of my car. It didn't feel quite right. I mean, honestly, this just didn't feel right in general. This just started getting fishy to me. The way that he talked to me, it just seemed like he was a con artist more than a person that would own a San Diego mansion. So I asked him straight and forward, "What do you do for a living, Jay?" He hesitated for a second. "I'm a doctor. Brain surgeon, doctor." He said it just that way, where it seemed like he was thinking of something to say before he said it. He also seemed like he wasn't quite there in his head. So I shut off the engine of my Honda, and I stepped out. Carefully as I peered my eyes, side to side, looking at the property, I noticed this for sale sign, just lying on the ground. Why is there a for sale sign lying on the ground over there? I asked. It was quite strange. The way it was just on the grass, almost like someone dug it out and just threw dirt over it. Jay seemed startled. I had just bought the house. He started quickly chit-chatting about the house. Really? I muttered under my breath. I took a good look at Jay, from head to toe, as he stood there just chit-chatting about nonsense in his gothic-sounding tone. Another thing seemed odd to me was his yellow Timberland boots and his blue jeans were awfully dirty. He didn't dress like a doctor. I didn't know if he could sense that I was feeling uncomfortable. Something just didn't seem right. He walked up to me and said, "Sarah, please come into my humble home. I want to show you the bedroom." With a gloomy smile, he grabbed my hand and held it tightly. His hand's cold, definitely not the hand of a doctor. He started walking forward and I gradually stumbled behind him. Everything in my body was just telling me, do not step forward. I then heard a voice in my head saying, "Stop, do not go." And then I froze and stopped walking with him. He looked at me and said, "Come on, babe. I want to show you your bedroom," in a creepy tone. Babe? Excuse me? I pulled my hand quickly away, and I raised my eyebrow. Sorry, Jay, but I think I'm going to get going. Then I turned around and started walking back towards my Honda, and Jay shouted, "Where do you think you're going?" He grumbled in a threatening manner. I looked back towards Jay. He had a disturbing look. He charged at me like a bull and grabbed my neck. I used my fingernails and clawed him right in the face like a cat. He screamed. I then poked him in the eye with my finger. I gashed it open. Blood was everywhere. "I'm gonna get you, bitch." He wailed like an alley cat. Oh no, you're not. I don't know what happened to me, but I was just ready to fight. It makes no sense. I acted like I was a UFC fighter, honestly, and I knew a little bit of martial arts, but I was no expert. He lurched back at me one more time, but I hit him straight in his face right where he couldn't see, and watched him fall back. He then got up and ran back towards the backyard, screaming like a girl. I thought it was funny. I heard someone screaming from upstairs. The front door was open. I felt frightened walking up there, not really knowing what I could do up there. I start hearing somebody screaming, "Help! Please help anyone!" The cries sound like a woman just desperately screaming. I pulled out my cell phone, but I had no reception. I dialed 911, but the call just wouldn't go through. "Please, someone, anyone help me!" The voice continued shouting for help. I felt like I was in one of those horror films. It was now dark around 7 p.m. I just wanted to jump in my car and drive away. It wasn't worth this creepy-ass room. I was so naive, thinking that this would be easy for me to get, that this was ideal. It was nothing of the sort. It was my nightmare, but something was urging me to go inside. I walked inside the mansion and it was dark. I tried flipping the light switch on. At this point, I was not in control of myself. Curiosity definitely killed the cat this time. I heard the lady scream for help again. I screamed back, "I'm coming." I ran up the staircase, got to the second floor, and there were several rooms. But one door was fully open, and I ran into that room, and I entered, and there was a girl in her mid-20s, tied up to a chair, that was beaten. When she saw me, she screamed, "Please get me out of here." I pulled out my phone, and I only had one bar of reception, and I dialed 911. The call finally went through. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered calmly. Yes, there is a crazy man at this house, and he's trying to kill me, and some woman is tied up. I need police here ASAP. The operator said, "Ma'am, please calm down. Tell me exactly what's going on." There's a man that attacked me and tied up another woman in a room. He's some weirdo off of Craigslist. He posted a room for sale. and when I said Craigslist, the operator said, "Oh, Craigslist. I'll have a unit get there as soon as possible." It was almost like Craigslist was the magic word for help. I untied the girl, and she ran towards the door and slammed it shut. "Thank you for saving me," she cried. I asked her, "What's your name?" She said, "Emma." I kind of had this assumption that I knew what was going on. The creepo Jay on Craigslist was luring women into this mansion, and it was listed, and he was trying to take advantage of them. I asked Emma, "So are you here for the room as well?" And she nodded yeah. She had the same exact situation. She had posted on Craigslist that she was looking for a room. The guy offered her the same amount of money. But crazy thing is, he gave her a different address yesterday, but her car broke down. She wasn't able to view the property, and today he gave her a different address. I thought it was a little odd, but he told me that it was an accident that he gave her the wrong address. Emma honestly was just breaking down at this point. Within 5 minutes, several officers showed up to the house looking for Jay, but Jay was nowhere to be found. It was like he just vanished. I told the officer what happened. I told him basically I pretty much jabbed him in the eye socket, and he couldn't possibly be far bleeding that much. Surprisingly, the officer responded that he had heard about a lot of these horror stories, especially from Craigslist. And then he told me that he could actually show me a way to screen people before we meet them. Emma was taken to the hospital. If I didn't get there when I did, I don't think she would have made it. You don't understand the amount of blood and how beaten she truly was. They made sure to give me an escort home. And 2 days later, the officer gave me a call and said that they found Jay. His name was actually Jason Blender. He was actually a serial killer and was wanted by the FBI. He was a truck driver that drove state to state looking for new victims on Craigslist. When he found an open house that he could break into, he went on Craigslist to search for women who had ads looking for a room. He killed 15 women in a 2-year span throughout the United States. But now he's finally locked away behind bars where he belongs. I'm very glad that here, they still have the death penalty, which was given to him. But I do really hope that the inmates give him a really nice beating while he's still living. So that's the end of my story. Now you can understand why it's so scary. I live with this every single day. I'm surprised that I finally posted it on here. But I hope somebody will learn something from this. Because this can happen to anyone. Please, please, don't make my mistake. About 4 years ago, I was trying to sell my Mazda Miata on Craigslist. My friend took some pictures of the car for me and put them online. All the people that I talked to on the phone about the car were all older men who seemed like they didn't really even read the description at all, asking me all just basic questions about my ad. It honestly seemed a little weird because I guess I just figured that somebody around my age would be drawn to the car, like 19-year-old females or something. Anyway, the calls started getting creepier and creepier, until finally I had a man call me who actually wanted to meet and see it. I was trying to find a public place, but he kept on insisting to meet me at my house. He wouldn't even talk to me about anything related to the car or anything. He just kept asking where I lived and what my cross streets were, as if I'm dumb enough to even meet him at my own house. After it got a little weird, I hung up on him and he kept on calling me asking me where I lived. I went online and removed my ad, and when I was removing it I realized that my friend had taken pictures of me in the car and pictures of me around it. So that kind of started to explain a little bit. But next thing I know, I have a couple of weird cars driving back and forth in front of my house. At first I thought maybe they were just a neighbor's friend or something, but they kept on making eye contact. So I decided that I was just going to stay inside and hope that they would just leave me alone. Later on I decided that it was time to go to bed. So I decided to go ahead and cut out the lights and close the blinds and everything. But I started noticing a set of headlights outside. It was like they were in my driveway. I live on the second floor, and I can still see the beams of light coming in through my window. I realized that it was somebody sitting in my driveway. I didn't know who it was. I didn't really think much of it because of the area. People get lost all the time. But it was like the 15th or 20th minute that I just sat there just waiting for them to leave. And once they finally did, I got a little bit more relieved. And so far I haven't had any more problems. I'm just hoping that it stays like that. It's been a few weeks now. Before I tell you my story, just know that I'm a firefighter, and this was a couple years back. There's some info in this story that you're gonna need to know, and why I was there. So here it is. A couple years ago, I'm backstepping on an engine company working on one of the nights of our tours. So the tone goes off so we can get ready, because dispatch frantically dispatches my engine and one of our ambulances to a gunshot victim. We arrive on scene, and right behind the ambulance only to find a male in his late teens laying unresponsive on the ground with an entry wound into his chin. No respirations and no pulse. We begin CPR, and as we cut all of his clothes off, we discovered that he had been shot in the lower abdomen and his chest. So as we later uncovered, the story was that he'd responded to a Craigslist ad from a guy selling headphones. Our victim had been responding to his ads on Craigslist, meeting people in quiet areas and robbing them at gunpoint. He also had recently just gotten out of jail. Well, the guy who was selling the headphones became a bit suspicious of this guy and meeting him in the place and asked his friend to come along. His friend happened to be a county corrections officer. He asked him to come along with him. When the victim arrived, he pulled a gun on them, and the CO opened the passenger door to use as cover and drew his sidearm, which is allowed to carry off duty. And then he discharged 3 rounds into a zipper fashion upwards into the victim. Our ambulance transported this guy, but he didn't make it. My buddy, who is now a county corrections officer, also told me that this same guy that killed the victim had been on stress leave and is possibly leaving his profession because of what he had to do. Says that he lives with the guilt because he didn't want to do it. So yeah, it went all terribly wrong. This is the end of my story. And I hope that you learn, don't use Craigslist. I was just talking about this the other day. Scary because of human nature. My neighbor at my old apartment was a state park ranger for years, but he's now retired. Apparently when he first got the job, there was a younger kid who went missing while out camping or a hiking trip. They organized this huge search for the area, to no avail. No clues or anything. The kid is just missing. A few years go by, and some new evidence turns up. It wasn't in the direction that they originally searched. It was just part of his camping equipment. On his off time, my neighbor took to searching the area where it was found, hoping that there would be more clues. Just outside of the state park lived a couple in a ramshack hovel who were quite reclusive and odd. One day my neighbor had to talk to them about something unrelated to this missing kid. He is in their house, which is a mess of junk. No running water, etc. Hard to focus on anything there. While he is talking to this couple, he realized that this guy has a weird-looking ashtray. He looks closer and realizes that it's a human skull, and it looks small. Later on, there's an investigation that goes on to the couple. And here's where the things get really weird. So the investigation goes on and shows that they were actually innocent of killing this kid. He probably died to exposure or dehydration. Apparently the guy came across the body afterwards, and his dogs were after it. When he took the skull, it was really recent after the death, and apparently it still had the head features, like the hair, eyes, everything. This guy took the head, defleshed the damn thing, took the top off to use it as an ashtray. Apparently, he was well aware that there was a current search party for the missing child back then, and could recognize the kid from the photos. But it never dawned on him or his wife to go to the cops, or to inform anybody. They just found him, and then they took his head. He just saw an opportunity to make an ashtray, and that's what he said. Apparently, he showed them where the remains were, and they were able to scourge up together enough to make a burial. What's even worse is they decided that they would keep it quiet so that the family didn't know that some guy in the middle of the woods put out his Marlboros in their kid's head for 5 years after letting his dogs eat the remains. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path, or slip down a small cliff, and they can't find their own way back. The majority of these people have always heard the stay where you are thing, and they don't usually wander far. But I've had 2 cases where that actually didn't happen. Both of them bother me a lot, and I used them as motivation to search even harder for these missing people in these cases. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were both together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked her where her brother was, she told us that he had been taken away by the bear man. She said that this bear man had given her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to go play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. But of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also so insistent about him not being a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair, like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to her mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and then she just never came back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help. Again, we searched the area, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone, but neither her nor the grandpa saw her come down. And there's still nothing to come from this. So, first of all, I only just discovered the subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and my family, and I really didn't want to talk about it back then, as it scared me to no extent. But it was a while ago, and it is really well known. Creepy story amongst myself and my family and friends. But I think I might as well share it, as it's admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and my sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time. It was 2008, which means that I was 19. I remember my dad just got Foxtel, which was cable TV for Australia. But only the TV in the lounge had a cable box, and I really wanted to somehow figure out how to get cable into my room without paying $99 or whatever for a new box. So Dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter and receiver. It was basically a 2-piece bit hardware where you would plug in the tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So, one Saturday, I decided to connect it. My younger sister, which was 16 at the time, was the only person in the home at the time. Upstairs in her room, my room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first I was going back and forth, trying to get these cables right, trying to get this channel right, etc., but no luck. Until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there, and something started fuzzing. This is where things start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see this picture come clearly. As it started fizzing in, I remember that this whole time the cable set top box wasn't even on. And that's why it wasn't working the entire time. But then why was I getting a signal? It seemed to all hit at once. I realized that the box was off. The picture was fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. It showed a picture, and I can't talk about it. I freaked out, as at first I thought it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2, and remember that the scene where she turns off the TV and the camera filming her is in her apartment. That was the first thing that I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized that it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose it was, or how we even got the signal. But obviously it was the AV receiver, picking up a camera signal. But we were just so confused as who it was or what it was. Eventually my parents came home, and we concluded that it must have been my neighbor, or someone living close by, for us to just pick up a receiving signal like that. We waited around till about 6 p.m., and then someone came into that room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed that it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or him had set it up to watch the other to see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was a tape, if you know what I mean. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer, and that he would film the murders that he would do in that room. But just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about one night we'll turn it on, and it'll be his face covered in clown makeup, and just staring at the camera waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened though, just understand that. But what did happen was still super creepy. We connected the signal for over a week. But after a few days, it kind of wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, and just resigned to the explanation that he was trying to catch his wife cheating. Until one day, we turned it on, and we realized what we discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. And during the weekend, they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed, and we saw a man walk into their room. It was a plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening the drawers. I called out to my mom, the only person that was home at the time, and we started watching it. He started going into the wife's drawers and started doing really weird things. At first we were like, oh my God, how embarrassing. He's being filmed. Will the neighbors somehow know? But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down at the fucking lens, and we were convinced he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad, and I kept watching. He started fiddling with it, and then put it back down. I told Mom that I didn't think he knew that we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left. Much to Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what he saw. Mom wanted to completely stay out of it, as she was terrified, which was understandable. When we told my neighbors, they had no idea what we were even talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found that was holding the camera was an installed device on the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently, and there were lots of water restrictions. Still is now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but it fitted a camera behind it, in the wall, to watch the bed. Immediately they called the police, who came and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of my time just telling my friends, showing them pictures. But truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just creepy thinking that we could have stuff like this hidden in our house. The chances are that we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what had happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would, at nights, come to our street, sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and would watch them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was, besides the obvious creepy dude sitting in his car watching people through his hidden camera, was because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's, or walked home drunk after a night out, I remembered seeing that station wagon, always down the street from our house. It was never during the day, always at nights. I'd always walk past and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that this creepy fucking plumber sitting back in there on a laptop watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day. But my friends and I have a good laugh about it from time to time. Back in 2007, around mid-June, my parents had gone out for the evening and had left me alone, which was a nice break. I was downstairs watching TV and went up to the kitchen to make some food. I don't quite know what it was, but something just didn't feel right to me, chalking it up to nothing after getting something to eat. I head back downstairs and called a friend. It was about 7 now, and my parents would be back around 10. As I was talking to my friend, all of a sudden, the line clicks. I try to get a dial tone on the cordless, and nothing works, and I hear a faint beeping sound upstairs. It's the trouble light from the alarm keypad. Now I'm worried, not panicking, but worried. Then I hear footsteps outside, and I remember there's a cell backup on the alarm. I hit the button with the police badge on it, hoping that the alarm would scare whoever was outside off, because the siren would go off on it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, so there is a neighbor not too far away, but farther than someone in the city. I hid in my bedroom for what felt like hours, but was only about 15 minutes until I saw the police through the window. My parents rushed home right away. There's a gray box on the side of the house, where the phone line comes in, where the wires were sticking out, and they found a pair of electrical pliers. That was not the shocking part, but what was next to it was a large butcher's knife. Person who was outside of my house, let's never meet again without me having a loaded gun. This happened to me a couple of months ago. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I was house sitting for my parents as they had gone away for about 2 weeks, so I thought I'd have my boyfriend stop over and keep me company. My house is an old converted farmhouse, out in the sticks, with no neighbors or main roads around. Very secluded and peaceful. Anyway, one night he was out drinking with his friends. He is 18, so legal to drink in the UK. I was sitting in the living room reading a book. Around midnight, I heard a single loud and aggressive knock at the front door. I momentarily panicked, given the lateness and the fact that I have no neighbors and nobody ever passes out here. But then I thought maybe it was my boyfriend coming home drunk and had forgotten his key. I didn't have a text from him to say he was coming home. But like I said, he was drunk. Maybe he forgot. I went to the front door and said, "Hello? Is that you, John?" Which was my boyfriend's name. And no answer. So I opened the door a touch and peered out. Nobody was there. That was weird, I thought. I shut the door and locked it again. Maybe I was just hearing things, I thought. But 30 minutes later, I heard pounding on the back door. Really hard and angry pounding. It lasted about 3 seconds and then stopped. I was freaking out, obviously, and immediately texted my boyfriend asking him to come home, as I was scared as I heard this pounding on the back door. And I think I should maybe ring the police. I was debating ringing the police. I know most wouldn't even need to debate this, but I didn't want all the hassle and the stress of ringing the police and stuff. When I heard the front door open, close, and then silence. Now the room I was in had a door separating it from the hallway, where the front door is. As you can imagine, I was shaking with fear. Whoever was doing this was now in my house, with just a door between us. Next thing I hear are nails scratching the door of the room I was in. As if somebody were slowly scratching the door, but with force. It was genuinely the stuff from a horror movie at this point. And the first thing that came to my mind, which was scream and throw a vase at the door. Don't ask what I was expecting that to do, other than smash to the ground. Then silence came. I heard the front door open again and slam shut. The footsteps on the gravel outside the front of my house. I did call the police, and they found no signs of forced entry. They searched the property inside and out and found nobody. They found muddy prints in the hallway, which the intruder must have gotten in through the back garden, which was very muddy in the winter. The front is all gravel, so no mud there. After they had gone, about 30 minutes later, my boyfriend comes home. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't seem drunk at all. He'd been out since 7 p.m., and it was now 2 a.m., and usually he stinks of alcohol nights out. He seemed stone cold sober, and no alcohol smell. I told him that someone had gotten into the house, and I didn't know who it was, or how, as he was the only one that has keys other than me. There was no forced entry, etc. He said, "Well, did you definitely lock the door after opening it, after hearing that first knock?" This confused me. I hadn't told him about the first knock on the front door. I just told him a guy had gotten in, and that I'd heard pounding on the back door. So how did he know about that door opening? I also noticed that his boots were muddy, which is strange because he got a taxi to go see his friends, and only walked through the front garden to the taxi. Which, as I said, there was no mud there. The back garden does, however. And somebody was pounding at the back door earlier. I had questioned it, and he had just said that he had gotten muddy outside of the pub. But that's all street there, so I don't see how he could have. And to think of it, I don't recall hearing a taxi pull up when he arrived home. Usually because it's so quiet and you can hear a taxi pull up outside. I don't know if I was being majorly paranoid here or not, but I think I suspect that my boyfriend was being the one behind the incident. We've been together a year, and he has never shown any weird behavior like this before, or since. But I have an overwhelming instinct that he was behind what happened. Only he had a key to get in, and I definitely did lock it. I made sure after hearing that creepy knock at the door that it was definitely locked, and seeing no one outside, I wouldn't have forgotten to lock it. It's been a couple months now, and I haven't mentioned this to him or anyone other than you guys. But what should I do? Should I bring this up? Am I being paranoid? I'm really confused, but my gut instinct is telling me that he was behind it. Even though I'd be heartbroken if it was true. And if it was him, why would he do this? He says he loves me and acts like he loves me. He comforted me lots that night and didn't leave me alone again until my parents returned. so I don't understand why he'd scare me like that. Edit. Whenever I mention that night to him, he always says something or changes the subject, and his reason is because he hates to think about what could have happened, and he feels guilty for leaving me alone, and that I should forget about it and move on. I think by posting this, I have decided I have to confront my boyfriend about this. There's no other way that I can get past it and relax again. I hope my instincts are wrong, but I will let you all know what happens once I do it. I'll do it soon, in the next week, because I need to put my mind at ease for all of this. Thank you all for your feedback so far. Update. Hey guys, I said I would update you on this, so here it is. I saw him last night, alone at his place as his flatmates were going out partying. I know some recommended doing this in public, but I felt like he would more likely confess in private. Anyways, I confronted him with all the evidence. I was very calm about it and told him that I just need to know. At first he was just flustered, saying stuff like, "What? What are you getting at here?" and couldn't really answer my questions. I told him calmly just to please answer it. If it was him behind this, I said I wouldn't be angry. This is when he flipped out. He started shouting and swearing. Do you really think that I'd do this to my own girlfriend? What kind of person accuses their boyfriend of this? There was basically a lot of swearing and shouting, but I won't repeat it here. He ranted for about 10 minutes, during which I started crying. He then said, "You know what? How would you like it if I turned this on you? Who's to say anybody even was there doing those things? Maybe you may have pulled this for attention." He basically just started accusing me for the next 5 minutes. He then said, "Let's just forget it," and tried to kiss me, as I was still crying. But I pushed him away, and then he told me to get out and go home if I was going to be like that. So I did. So anyway, all of last night felt awful. I felt like a terrible person. I really began doubting myself and heard nothing from him at all that night. This morning he had texted me, and this wasn't what I was expecting. A full confession, just like that. After all that fuss and anger, he had been accusing me. He then just confesses like that, like it was nothing. He said he was sorry, and I asked why did he do this? The next bit I hate having to even say, and I don't want to believe that is true. He said he gets turned on at the thought of me being scared and vulnerable. He said that's why he did it. He said he would never actually harm me, and that is completely normal. He mentioned that some people have fantasies and would never intend on acting upon them, and that this is no different. I was obviously freaking out. I expected the worst to be him just playing a prank and that it went wrong. Not that he gets turned on by scaring women, making them feel vulnerable. I said this isn't a normal thing, and then he said that I would understand as I get older and experience lots of people have weird fantasies. He said I'm just naive right now. He's 18, which was a year older than me, but a lot more experienced. I asked why he denied it yesterday. He said because he knew that I wouldn't understand, and it would just freak me out. He thinks it's completely normal that he did, and then he started turning the conversation to another path. Anyways, I needed some space, and I would contact him in a few days, so that's what I told him. He said not to tell the police, and I said I wouldn't. I know I'll get hate on here because of that, but I need time to think first. He said he isn't going to let this change things, and that he's not going to let something like this ruin what we have. And even though I said not to be texting me, he's been texting me very sweet and cute things all day, which I haven't replied to. The last I spoke was this morning saying I need space. But anyways, thanks for listening, and all the advice. Turns out I don't know him as well as I thought, and I don't know what to do about this. I don't think I can see a future with him anymore. He swears it's normal, but I don't think it is. The story happened when I was 21, and I used to go climbing in the mountains during the weekends. By that time, I don't remember anything that I liked more than just climbing. So every weekend I took my gear and drove up to the mountains about 1 hour away from my home. I also used to take my tent because I loved sleeping in the mountains and coming home the next day. So one Saturday morning, I took my gear and my tent, as usual, and got into my car. When I arrived there, I found my friends and they told me that they didn't feel like climbing as somebody just suffered an accident and the police were trying to find out how it happened. We didn't go back to the city. We stood there by the mountainside in the camping site. It was something like a farm, but not really. It was a large extension of land with one small house, if you could say, in the middle of it. And by house, I mean that it was just a room, and there was only a table and a kitchen for us to prepare a not-so-fancy meal. After talking for a while, showing tricks, setting the tent and having dinner, we didn't really drink as we were going to climb the next morning at 6 a.m. We all went to sleep. At 4 a.m. or something like that, I felt the need to go to the bathroom. I thought of the possibility of holding it until there was light outside, but that couldn't be done. I took my flashlight and went out. At one end of the land, there was bathrooms. They were far away from the camping site, so I started singing a song to myself to soothe me. You could easily see the bathrooms from the distance because the lights were on. So when I got there, I got in. Just an FYI, there are no doors on these bathrooms. And there were 8 toilets, but no doors, just a wall separating them. So I went to the very last one figuring that if somebody came in, they wouldn't catch me with my pants down. When I go out of the bathroom, I started walking to my tent. But suddenly there was a sudden breeze accompanied with a woman's sad sigh. I looked back and standing there in the entrance of the bathroom, there was a woman who looked very sad, and she had her eyes on me. I was already at the halfway point between the tent and the bathrooms, but I kept looking at her, mostly because I thought, if I look back, she is going to be standing there for sure. She was just standing there, and I just stood there, looking at her. I didn't know for how long. The thing is, I was really scared, but I have seen these kinds of things a lot. And once it happened to me, I looked back, and that lady was near me. I didn't want that to happen again. I thought seeing her from a distance wouldn't be as bad as if she was standing next to me. I knew everyone in the campsite, and I had been inside the bathroom, so I didn't know where she came out of. After an eternity of just staring at her, she disappeared with a second breeze, and I ran for it. She just faded away, and I ran straight back to my tent. I got into my tent and promised myself I would never drink a lot of water just before going to bed again. We woke up the next morning at about 5:45. Nobody heard anything, saw anything. I thought maybe it was just me being tired, but she was just so real, and she just faded into darkness. Later on, we decided to go ahead and start climbing. It was a very fun day, and I finally started forgetting about it. I was listening to a story, and this popped back in my mind, so I wanted to make sure to share it with you. Tell me what your thoughts are. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in a national forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we do not plan on returning unless we are with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in the northern Wisconsin area and in the UP, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we've been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We planned to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter and spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty and the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging road as we made our way to the parking lot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, if you could say, as they had a rusted-out, dinged-out pickup truck, complete with the Confederate bumper stickers and everything. As we drove past, I waved, and they just stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. Before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again, and I saw them watching us through a haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I were just joking about the up north people, but we did not think anything of that encounter. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked on the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lusciousness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found ourselves a campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up a tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled some water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures that we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs. But that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make a noise. So I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me into my sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from the home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silent in our tent, hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent that we brought had no windows. We could only guess at what was making that noise outside of our tent. We initially thought that an animal had gotten to our food, or the garbage bag, which we left in the shelter. But the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through the food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried my can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on some weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued and we remained still, as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making that noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed to be an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in the complete silence, with only dull buzz from the insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, and the voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what they were saying, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to get louder. Whoever was out there did not spot our tent, or they just decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins, and we just sat there. At the first of light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was there, but I only saw the forest, and the backpacks, and the shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camping pads and put our tents away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance of the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there was a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and it was covered with scattered, fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging the entire way back with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting close to the car. We were quickly rejoiced as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in a near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck on it. As we inched closer to the car, we saw there was blood smeared on the windshield, and I'm not going to tell you what was on the windshield wiper. There was hair and blood still stuck on the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't even bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear in the trunk and we sped off without removing what was on our vehicle. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of dust behind our car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed what was on our vehicle with some newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was definitely the last trip I ever took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. A group of friends were staying in a remote cabin that one of my friend's cousins owned. There were no roads leading to this cabin, and it was a good 3/4 day hike from where you park your car. I couldn't go at the same time as everyone else due to work obligations, so I decided to head up there the same day but later. It would mean I would leave and have to camp at night by myself though. The later part of the trail is too dangerous to be taken at night, especially by someone who doesn't know it. I didn't care though. I was kind of looking forward to it as I've never camped alone before. So I was in the middle of these woods when the sun went down. I got my camp set up in this little clearing, probably 40 feet across if I had to guess. I get my campfire going and pitch my small one-person tent. I do all that camping stuff, like cooking hot dogs on a stick over the fire and some s'mores. I probably stay up for a good 2 or 3 hours after dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were kind of short. The entire time I thought I was hearing stuff moving in the woods, on the edge of the clearing. I didn't really think anything of it at first because the woods are full of animals. But as the night went on, I realized whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention to it, it made about 4 or 5 laps around before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped as soon as I stood up, and I thought I heard something or someone going away through the woods. I just shrugged it off, thinking it was just a fox that was just curious and got scared when I stood up. I decided it's time for sleep. I doused the fire and I climbed into my tent. I started to doze off and stay in a half-sleep, half-awake state for a while. I normally hear weird shit when I'm in that state, so I don't think much of when I hear a voice. Something wakes me all the way up, though, and I realize that this voice is real and right outside of my tent. It's just above a whisper, and I'm not sure if it was another language, or if they were speaking English in such a way that I just couldn't understand. I lay there for some time. I don't know how long, listening and waiting for something to happen. There is just enough moonlight to light up the walls of the tent, so I can see the hands pressed into the wall of my tent down near my foot. This freaks me out, and I sit up quickly. Whoever was outside of my tent tore ass out of there, like running full sprint through the woods. I get out of my tent and I shine a flashlight around and see nothing. I was expecting there to be like bloody handprints on the tent, but nope. Didn't sleep that night. Packed up my camp at first light that morning, and I booked it to the cabin. There was a group of teens that hadn't been heard from after their scheduled return time for a camping trip. A coworker and I head out into the general direction of the teens. We'd been hiking for almost a day and have seen nothing. We're about 35 kilometers into the woods at this point, when we start noticing odd things. Sticks carved like spears into the ground. Weird carvings in the trees. A child's stuffed animal hanging from a noose up in a tree. This place was nowhere near any roads. It wasn't on the regular trails people would usually take in this area. The really eerie thing was that everything was freshly carved. Somebody had been there within the last couple hours of us and made these things. Mind you, we're still looking for these teens. We kept on hiking and eventually made camp for the night, still kind of on edge from what we had seen, but we settled down anyway to go to sleep. We get up with the sunrise, hoping to cover more ground before it gets too hot. We pack up the gear and get ready to go, when I notice a bit of a shirt. It was caught on a small tree and ripped along with some shoe prints. We were thinking, great, maybe we're getting close to these teens. But that's when we got a radio call. The teens had just been found 20 kilometers east of us, and they're calling everybody back now. All those weird things that we had seen the day before came flooding back into my mind, and we wasted no time hiking out of those woods. And still to this day, it still gives me chills. I would like to know who put those there. I've posted this before in another thread, but I feel like it fits here. So this happened to me on my graveyard shift. I was helping another short-staffed store across town out. So, I had a woman come in. She seemed a little frazzled and is carrying a Bible, but otherwise, she seems fine. She buys some chips and then starts talking to me about how crazy this coronavirus stuff is, yada yada. Then she tells me that she ate an evil spirit pretending to be a clove of garlic. I, of course, thought that she was just messing around with me. But no! She pulls out a piece of garlic and lays it on the counter and starts telling me that the garlic is in fact a demon that wanted to possess her. She then starts talking to me about if I believe in spirits, or if I can see it, because despite looking like I'm one of the humans that's a third demon, I'm really a human who is a third angel who was sent to Earth to help her expel these evil spirits and urges that she feels, and that it's okay if I don't know yet, because she can see it. And she leaves the garlic on the counter and tells me that she'll wait for me to deal with it. Now that's pretty much where the original incident ended. A few days later, about 2 a.m., maybe 2:15ish on a Tuesday, I'm working the graveyard shift at my usual store when this woman pops up again. She proceeds to just buy some candy and sort of hang out asking me about jade, the jewelry type, and insists on if we've met before. Nothing as weird as before. Now, the weird thing is, I didn't hear or see her come in before she approached the counter. We have a weird loud-ass siren thing that turns on when the door opens and only shuts off when they're closed. which is normally not a big deal, but considering I'd been stocking and cleaning in the front for the whole time, and had only gotten 2 or 3 customers beforehand, yeah, it was a little bit weird. She hangs out a bit longer, and then rushes to the bathroom and doesn't walk out till about 6. Says to me to have a nice day and just walks out of the store like nothing. Which freaked me the fuck out, cause I cleaned the restrooms a little bit after she went in, and she somehow managed to slip out and or hide somewhere when I went to clean them. Outside of hiding in the bathroom stalls, there is nowhere to hide in the restrooms, and there's no windows to slip out of. And like a jackass, I looked up at the top of the stall at the ceiling, thinking she had pulled some Spider-Man shit. But nope, she just poof. Disappeared and then reappeared, and left super casual a couple hours later. My dad left for a few months for a job in another country, so it was just my mom, my little sis, who was a baby, and me at the age of 5. I remember this vividly. My mom hated staying alone without my dad. Said it didn't feel safe. The house itself was very secure. It was fully fenced and only had 2 entrances, the kitchen and the front entrance. Each entrance had 2 doors, an internal solid wood door, and then an external solid iron door. All of the windows in the house were plantation-style shutters. They open and close when you turn the little knob thingy. These were made out of some sort of like steel or iron combo. I would sleep in my mom's bed with her, and my little sis would have the same room in her crib. My mom used to lock the door and push the dresser up against it. She was a very, very paranoid woman. The night my dad left, we started to hear a clicking or something, like how when somebody would step on a leaf and it would crack. We had these large trees in the backyard and piles of leaves on the ground. My mom let out a scream and thought that it would scare off whoever it was, or whatever it was, but it didn't. We kept hearing the clicking, and my mom kept screaming. The phone was in the living room. It was early 90s, so we didn't have a cell phone. The house on the left was just too far out of range to hear her screams. The one on the right was an old couple who couldn't do anything for us. During this time in my country, you had to wait until morning to call the police station. And even then, these people didn't have a phone. We felt trapped. I remember the absolute terror I felt. My teeth were chattering so bad that I felt like I was going to crack a tooth. My mom tells me that that's the one thing that has always stayed with her from this incident. The sound of my teeth clacking. At one point she opens the shutters a little to try to see if there was a person there. The light in the bedroom was on, and a beam of light shines across a person's eyes. She recognizes him immediately. It was Dad's acquaintance. She knew it was him because he had very distinct eyes. Bright green and cat-like. She loses it and grabs a shoe to throw it at the window as hard as she could, in the area where she saw him. This was a clog-type shoe against steel shutters. I cannot accurately describe the sound, but it was a jarring sound. This was the longest night of my life. It went on for hours. This dude fumbled around in the dark, trying to get into our house. My mom's guttural screams for help. We waited. We waited him out till dawn. My little sister actually went into shock. She was a really cranky baby who would just cry over the slightest things. But she did not cry once this whole night. I remember looking over at her as this was happening, her standing in her crib, all big, watery-eyed and silent. The next morning, my mom says, "Fuck this," and starts packing up all of our stuff. She says we're going to move in with Grandma until my dad comes back. On our way there, we take this Greyhound-like bus because my mom doesn't have a license. Guess who's on the bus? The fucking creeper. He just looked over at her and smiled. Didn't say hello or anything, just smiled and a weird glint in his eye. To this day, my mom swears that this dude thought he was going to get a second chance. Possibly thought it was the following night. But my mom definitely noped us the fuck out of there. She was worried he was going to figure it out because we had luggage with us. And guess what? He didn't. He didn't even know where my grandmother lived. Years later, when my mom talked about it, she told me point blank, had he gotten into the house, he was going to do something to all of us. She says that this dude used to look at me a lot when I rode my bike in the neighborhood. He also eyed up her and my baby sister. About 3 years ago, I had attended a house party that was thrown by my friend named Jane. I was visiting from London and had to come back to my hometown to visit family and friends. There were a lot of people that I knew and one or two new faces. I would be the social butterfly that I always have been, and I would always talk to everyone. I struck up a conversation with Anthony, one of the guys that were there. At 24, he was 3 years younger than me and lived in a town not too far away. He struck me as a little odd, but harmless, as he wasn't drinking. He just sat there on the sofa just chugging a big bottle of Coke like he was a baby, and kept telling everyone that he didn't drink and didn't do drugs. There was nothing strange about this to me, as a few people at the party were just on the same boat as him. We chatted about music and how we had a few mutual friends. And about after 10 minutes of the conversation, I left and went to talk to other people. A few days later, I returned to London, and he had sent me a friend request on Facebook. I accepted as I thought I would probably end up seeing him again a few more times at some parties that Jane so often threw, and I didn't want to seem rude. He instantly messaged me and was saying how it was great to meet me and how he thought I was attractive. I straight away told him that although it was nice to meet him, I had been in a relationship for 6 years, and I was blissfully happy, and I wasn't interested. He accepted this and jokingly said, "If you're ever single again, I want to take you out." We would continue chatting occasionally, catching up and the like. He would tell me about his struggles with his autism, and as I have a cousin who suffers severely with it, I sympathize with him. After about a year, my relationship suddenly took a nosedive, and I ended up moving back to my hometown. Instantly, he started to insist that he needed to take me out for dinner, and that he wanted to make me his girlfriend. I told him point blank that I wasn't interested, and him acting this way was more difficult to be friends with him. He would have severe highs and lows, and then would have passive-aggressive states on Facebook, saying how girls don't like him because of his autism, and how he constantly gets friend-zoned. He would then start texting me. I have no idea how he got my number, by the way, but he would constantly ask me out, and I would decline. He would say how it's been years since he's had sex, had a girlfriend, and thinks I am the one. I continued to tell him that I wasn't interested, and that I don't think that we should be friends anymore. It was around this time he had taken to commenting on my Facebook photos, saying things like, "You'll be mine one day." One of his friends, Joe, had seen this, and had commented back, "In your dreams, mate, she is way out of your league." Me and Joe had started talking, and we had a lot in common and attraction to each other. Needless to say, Anthony lost his shit and started messaging me saying that Joe was a girlfriend stealer, and how he was a C-word who deserved to die. I broke off all contact with him at this point, blocked his number, deleted him, and blocked him on Facebook, etc. Joe started telling me that they went to college together, and that he was always obsessive with girls, and that it was always really strange like this. After a year and a half of being together, we parted ways, for reasons I would not like to discuss. I was sent a ton of messages from Jane saying, "Look at this Tumblr link," as I opened it. It was a fucking essay about me, and how he was in love with me, how I was the one, and how I was degrading myself by having sex with other men. He detailed how he wanted to have sex with me, and wanted to get me pregnant, and how that would make me his forever. He kept repeating that Joe was a girlfriend stealer, and that he hated him. And the thing that creeped me out the most was the sentence, "She says she doesn't want me, but I will make her love me." Soon after this, the post and blog got deleted. I never thought to screen cap it, as I never thought I would end up talking about it on a site like this. But a few weeks ago, I got a phone call from a number. I was waiting for a takeaway, and I know that the drivers usually call me for directions, as my apartment is quite hard to find. It was Anthony, and he begged for me to hear him out and started to apologize for what he said, and told me that his autism was to blame. Being the soft touch that I am, I actually listened to him and agreed to listen to his apology. After about 2 minutes of talking in this conversation, it went like this. Anthony, guess where I am? Me, where? Anthony, I'm at the football club. This club is across the way from my apartment. Me, why the hell are you there? Anthony, I'm drunk and stoned. I sat in the field. I'm having to do things, 'cause I'm just so... And I know you live nearby. It's your fault I'm drinking and doing drugs. It's because you hurt me. He proceeded to moan my name into the phone. I promptly hung up, and I felt sick that he was just so close to my home, and that he was doing that. I have no idea how he found out where I live, but I suppose with mutual friends, it wouldn't be too hard to find this out. The rest of my night, he was sending me certain pictures and videos of himself, if you know what I mean, sending me messages of certain types. In between all of this, for over 3 years, I would get messages from girls calling me a tease and saying that he had told them that I was leading him on and using him. Others would say that I cheated on him with his best friend from school and ran away with him. One of these girls kept messaging me saying I was discriminating against him because of his autism. And when I went to tell her that it wasn't the case, she called me a liar and a scumbag, and etc. Kept on going for a little bit. Turns out, the same girl that said that is now pressing charges against him for sexual assault. They had become friends, and he had declared his love for her after a few weeks, and started to grab her in specific areas in front of her fiancé. I also had another woman that I am friends with tell me that he randomly added her on Facebook, and within 10 minutes of talking to him, he started sending her pictures and telling her he was pleasuring to her photos. This guy is a fucking scumbag who uses his disability to guilt people into feeling bad for him, when in fact he's a crazy-ass stalker. He got this obsessive when he had met me once, so I hope to God that his friend pressing charges against him will get him the help he needs. I haven't seen him since, and I'm glad that I haven't. When I was 14, I was waiting for the bus, and this truck pulled up beside me. The driver kept on waving me to come closer and closer, and he held up a map. It seemed like he just wanted directions. I went over to the truck and he rolled down the window. I didn't realize what was about to happen until he reached out and tried to grab me by the hair. I dropped my bag and ran as he sped off. When I got home, I woke up my mom and told her what happened, and she flipped out. Then when we looked out of the window, surprise, surprise, the truck was sitting across the street, and the man was sitting in the driver's seat, staring up at us. That's when I flipped out. My mom called the police and gave a description, but the man drove off. Later on, the police called back to tell us that they had someone they wanted me to look at. They put me in the back of an unmarked patrol car with tinted windows and drove me past the guy who was being questioned outside of his truck. It was him. I almost had a panic attack. They charged him with attempted kidnap. It made all the local papers around here. And the spot where they pulled him over at was right in front of the elementary school. And when they searched his truck, they found rope, duct tape, and an axe. So to you, creepy guy that decided to pull my hair, let's not meet again. When I was 15, my mother went out shopping and left me in charge of the house. It was starting to get dark and I realized that my little brother was nowhere to be found. I asked my sister if she knew where he was, and she said that he had gone to the park around the corner to kick his football around. I told her to watch the house while I was gone, and I ran off into the direction of the park. When I got there, I was surprised to find the park completely empty. I called out for my brother's name, but there was no answer. I started to get worried. All of a sudden, I heard a faint muffled noise coming from my left. I turned just in time to see a tall figure disappearing behind a large fence. I sprinted as fast as I could, and when I came around the other side of the fence, I saw something that almost made me choke in horror. My little brother was being dragged down an alleyway by a tall man. I flew into a rage, and tears of anger just streamed down my face. I ran at him, and he must have heard me coming, because he turned around to face me and dropped my younger brother. The tall man tried to grab me, but I was running at him so fast that when I slammed into him, I knocked him off of his feet. He swore and tried to get back up, but I just started stomping on his face, without stopping to ask questions. I picked up my little brother and we ran as fast as we could back to the house. By this time, it was pitch black outside and my mother was home. She was frantic with worry, and when she saw the look that was on both of our faces, she realized that something bad had happened. As I explained, my brother and I started crying to my mom, and she gave us the biggest hug that we've ever had, and cried with us. I'm glad that I stomped on his face. He fucking deserved it. One evening when I was about 8 or 9, I was walking home from school. My mom worked during the day and usually came home around later in the evening. When I got to my house, I took the keys out of my pocket and let myself in. But just as I reached to put the key in the lock, the door suddenly opened. My mom was standing there in her dressing gown. Instead of greeting me, she looked straight past me and in a stern voice demanded, "Who are you?" I turned around just in time to see a man in a trench coat hurrying back down the path and taking off down a street. The fact that my mom was sick that day, stayed home from work, probably saved me from the horrible fate that I could have had. I thank her every day. I talked in a previous post about some of my experiences with my family and how it was currently passed into my current house. They were mainly before I was born, so I would like to talk about my personal experiences that have followed me since I was a child, and also the experiences I've heard about. I'm going to write them down in chronological order with my own, so just bear with me. When I was just a kid, about 6 to 7, I had an imaginary friend that I called Carlos. My family was curious and cautious about it, as they would let me go outside into the small hallway beside the house, where I constantly spoke with somebody. I remember some flashes about it. I remember taking toys out there to the space, and once taking my cat for a friend to see it, and my family would just come and see what I was doing by the window. But one day my mother rushes out, because I'm climbing the fence of the yard in order to go with Carlos, since he was asking me to leave with him, as his parents were outside waiting for him. I told her, "Mom, Carlos wants to take me to his family. They're outside. Look at the horses, Mommy." I described the scene to her, as his family was in a horse cart. She grabbed me and we entered the house. During a homework session of preschool, my mom and I were cutting some newspaper articles, and suddenly I was excited telling Mom that a kid from the paper looked exactly like Carlos. The article was about a revolutionary movement that happened about 80 years ago in my town, a fight the local people had for their lands. During my childhood, I was a fan of dinosaurs, so I had a lot of toys from Jurassic Park. Some of them made noises, like roars and alarms, for the Jurassic Park facility. I remember clearly how it was normal for them to just start playing alone in my room, while some other toys were making sounds by their own. But for me, when asked, Carlos was playing with me. There were occasions I wasn't home, and my family, while walking past to the bathroom, you had to pass through my room to reach it. They heard the toys making their noises without any action. My family gave my toys away after some time. One night, I was about 8 or 9 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was excited because I had a fallen tooth below my pillow, and the tooth fairy was going to give me money. So when I lifted the pillow, there was my tooth. I just went back to my original position and looked at the roof. But I felt a weird sensation, like pressure around me. I started to hear voices, but no actual words. It was just telling something I cannot understand. Suddenly I started to hear perceived movement, like if some quick figure passed around the bed, and that's where I saw it. There was in front of me a shadow projected onto the closet. It was not a shadow person. It was literally just the shadow of a humanoid figure in the wall. It was like if a person was standing between my bed and the wall, but the person was invisible. The only light visible was the moonlight entering my big window, but it was clear enough to be sure that the shadow was there. At first, I just looked in fear. I noticed that the shadow was not moving, but it was vibrating. Its whole body was just like a vibration. The voices now were silent. As I was about to grab something to hide from it, the shadow started walking to the right, reaching the side wall, and it was like the shadow passed through it. It just trespassed the wall, like going into another room. Me, after seeing the shadow gone, I went to my mother's room to tell her about it. I'm sure I wasn't dreaming. I went to my mother's room to tell her about it. I'm sure I wasn't dreaming, and my mother recalls that the moment with me crying and telling her all of it. She said that she remembered. Curious thing, when I returned to the room and looked for my tooth, it wasn't there anymore. But there was the money that I was expecting. That was the first time that I felt fear in that house. One night, everyone in the house was sleeping, when suddenly, my older brother started screaming. He was about 16 years old at the time. The whole family rushed into his room and saw him scared. He told us that he woke up to as a negative feeling was passing through his body, and when he looked into the corner of the room, an old woman in a white dress was looking at him with big black eyes. He asked nervously who she was. Didn't get a response, and instead the old lady disappeared and appeared next to him, standing next to his bed with an unnatural face. That's when he screamed. After the scream, the old lady vanished as we were entering his room. Now he has a daughter, and 2 years ago, his daughter was 3 years old. She was wandering around the house, and we noticed how she was just frozen looking at something in one direction. It was odd. The kid is very active. And then from nowhere she just says, "Dad, there's an old lady calling me from that room." And she pointed to my brother's old room. We only looked at each other and then grabbed her, telling her that nobody was in there. She just went quiet and nobody talked about it. This one is me going back to my youth. There were some events that my family considered normal by that time. Noises in the kitchen, doors opening and closing, footsteps, that sort of thing. We just ignored it. As I grew older, about 13 to 14 years old, I moved to my older brother's room. During the nights, I felt like I was being observed. I just had that feeling from everywhere in the room. It has no windows, so when the lights were off, it was complete darkness. I had music posters in the walls and pictures hanging on it, and I started seeing faces in the reflections. In the movie posters, I saw them as the light reflected in the movie posters in the glass of the pictures hanging. I even took a photo of one of them, but that happened a long time ago. The cell phone didn't have any external memory, so when the phone died, the content died with it. It was a selfie photo, and when I looked at the result, a giant face with its mouth wide open was displayed in the poster behind me. It looked so clearly. The nose, the mouth, the eyes, the ears. I showed that picture to everyone around me. One day I was alone in the house, seeing the exorcism of Emily Rose. And there is one scene where they attempted to exorcise her, and the family is waiting outside. There was the crucifix in the scene vibrating, and at the same time, this crucifix went down to be an inverse crucifix. All of the doors of the house were punched hard, like a fury strike to them. Just one loud slam, and I freaked myself out and went to all of the doors looking around for any explanation. But I was just alone. Somewhere that time, we had a cousin living in our house since she was studying in a local university, and she was from another state. We also had a female black cat. This cat came from the streets, and we adopted her. My cousin was alone in one occasion. She was inside the house just seeing the TV when she noticed the cat sitting next to her, seeing her with a lot of attention, like if the cat was concentrating just seeing her. And then the cat told her, "Where is my name and my little brother's name? I want to play with them." My cousin was so shocked for what just happened that she ran out of the house. When we found her, she was crying, telling us about it. We spoke to her and told her that maybe she was sleeping or confused. After some nights, she was sleeping in my old room. And at that time, if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you needed to pass through that room. So one night, she woke up as my little brother was walking towards the bathroom. But she saw a woman with her hair so long that it could touch the ground, with some kind of strange clothes that she was just walking behind him in. My cousin followed them with her eyes until my brother opened the bathroom door and the woman disappeared. But 2 seconds later, the cat jumped to my cousin's bed and above her chest, seeing her do that same focusing thing as last time. My cousin screamed and we all rushed in, finding her hysterical, telling us the story and pointing at the cat. The cat escaped from the room, scared from all the noises and the movements. My cousin left a few days later and started renting an apartment. At 16 years old, approximately, I moved to the bedroom in the second floor of the house. The first night, I was walking up the stairs and I hear my name, like a whisper in the hallway. Female voice, very close to my ear. I looked everywhere, but there wasn't anyone with me. I didn't put a lot of thought into it, so I continued to my room. Some nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling something just wasn't right, like a constant concern feeling, and I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and slow footsteps. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I just sat in my bed just hearing how someone was just approaching the second floor. I heard the door of the living room open. To get to my room, you had to pass through the stairs door, pass through the living room, and open my door. I heard footsteps getting closer to the other side of my door, and it just stayed there. At that moment, I knew somebody was outside of my room. The door started to open slowly by itself, and I realized there was no one on the other side of that door, but an intense feeling of discomfort and some kind of pressure emanating from it. I stayed frozen for around like 5 seconds until the footsteps started running from the door to my bed as I was scared and hid below my blanket. But then, nothing. When I looked outside the blankets, the door was closed. The feeling was gone. But I'm sure I didn't close my eyes during this experience. I was not dreaming. But then, the scratches started. At the beginning, they were not significant, so I didn't really worry about it. Small cuts on my arm, shoulders. I believe it was just me in my sleep, but it started to get serious. I woke up a couple of days with large cuts on my arms, abdomen, legs, and some spots on my back that it was just difficult for me to reach. They were often 3 to 4 scratches parallel, and they hurt. It couldn't be me, because I have a bad behavior problem of biting my nails. So practically I have no nails. And these scratches seem to be more of like a animal look, like a cat scratch, but larger. One day I woke up with a pain in my shoulder, and on both of them, I had these deep cuts with dried blood. But my mind was trying to be skeptic about it. One occasion, I was seeing the TV in the living room. I was wearing some loose shorts, and I started to feel a pain on my leg. Immediately I checked and there was nothing. But I started seeing 3 scratches form on my leg, as if something was scratching me slowly in real time. I put my hands on it, and it didn't stop. I was seeing 3 lines of blood appearing from nowhere. That's where I approached my uncle, who I had talked about in a previous post, since he had the same similar situation in my house when he was younger. Long story short, I talked to my uncle that had the same problem about it. He saw the scratches, and I joined his church for the time. Strange things happened also in that congregation, but it would be a story for another post. An afternoon I went to my room to pick up something, and as I was entering into the living room prior to my room, the TV turned on by itself. I wasn't scared, but I was just curious about it. I went to turn it off, and as I approached the stairs, the TV turned on again. Just static in the screen. I reached the power cable and disconnected it and ran to my stairs. The night I decided to move from that bedroom, I was sleeping when a loud noise woke me up. After some seconds, trying to figure out what it was, I noticed the closet door shaking. As I was sitting on the bed, the door aggressively opens, and some kind of force pushed me down on my bed. I started praying the words that my uncle had taught me, and after some seconds, the thing was gone. I had no other option but to return to my old room. Back in that room, some time passed. The scratches continued, and I considered it normal and didn't really pay much of attention. I had problems with my ex-girlfriend about them, saying that they were made by another woman. But it wasn't that case. Anyway, we started to let things happen with no questions. Then in one occasion, I woke up looking at a wall next to my bed, and I went up to go to the kitchen to grab some water. It was in the night, as I recalled no lights from the windows. When I finished with my glass of water, I looked back to return to my bedroom, and I stood there, frozen, as several shadow humanoid figures were standing all over the dining room table and in the living room. They had different sizes, some of them taller, some of them bigger, and they were all just looking at me. The fright of the scene almost made me faint. Instead, I woke up looking at the wall. I was so confused since the previous experience was so real. And now again in my bed. I got up from my bed and went again into the kitchen, but I don't know why. I laid down on the floor and started hearing voices all over the place. They were familiar voices from brothers, relatives, and I started to feel them walking on me. I couldn't say anything, couldn't move, as I felt the humiliation feeling. I don't know why I laid down. I felt like I was nothing, that I didn't have a place for anyone. I started crying, but then I woke up, looking at the same wall. I heard someone in my room, and when I looked back, there was this old man in the corner of the room. I asked him what he was doing in there. I didn't feel fear. It was just strange. This old man started talking to me about the phases of a dream. Suddenly he had a board and started drawing some kind of circles between circles, some of them merging spaces. He talked about how it was some phase. The consciousness travels between different dimensions. Some of them interact between them, allowing to share elements, time and physical manifestation. As he was explaining this to me, I was seeing the drawings, trying to understand everything he was telling me. But then, I woke up, looking at the same wall. But this time, I couldn't move. I was looking at the wall, incapable of moving, and I began to tremble as I heard the door opening behind me. Then, nothing. No footsteps or a presence for some odd seconds, until I felt the feeling of something jumping on my bed. Something was jumping next to me on my bed. Shaking in fear, I just waited for the worst to happen. It was notorious, the extra weight next to me in bed. And suddenly, I heard a strong purring sound, like a cat, and I thought that my cat somehow opened my door and cuddled in my bed. I was a little more calm, until I saw a black, thin hand with large, pointy fingers, and it grabbed my shoulder. As the purring sound increased and next to my ear, I was looking with the peak of my eye. The hand grabbed me. I was shaking, trying to escape this moment. I was desperate, trying to end this cycle. And then, I woke up, looking at the wall. This time I was able to move. I got up out of my bed and took my phone. I made a call to somebody. I just don't recall who it was. But I was telling him all about the dreams, the humanoid figures, me lying on the floor, the old man with the dreams explanation, and the strange creature that was purring. This person was only answering things like, "And then what? How did you feel?" Stuff like that. I started to feel something wasn't quite right. There was something odd in the voice of this person. The voice became deeper and deeper, and I realized I was still dreaming. After this revelation, the scenario changed. I wasn't talking on the phone anymore, and I was in my room. But I was looking at myself, in the bed, looking at the wall. I tried to move, but my body wasn't there. I tried to see my hands, but got no response. Then I heard the door opening from behind me. I started to feel a negative presence approaching me. I couldn't look back, so I began to attempt to communicate to myself, screaming, but no voice came out. And then I saw it. Below me, I saw some kind of humanoid figure crawling on the floor. It was black, hairless, very thin, like abnormally thin. It was like looking at a very thin man walking as an animal. Its spine was very visible, as it was very thin. You could see its ribs. I noticed something kind of weird. It had two pointy ears. Then it looked at my bed and jumped next to my body. It started the purring again. As I was seeing the scene, I was desperately trying to wake myself up. I just wanted to make it go away, but I was just watching my own nightmare. This thing grabbed my shoulder again and went really close to my ear, purring more intense than before, and began to roll its tail between my legs. At that moment, I started to get away from my bed. I tried to hold back and help myself, but something was pulling me a part of the room. As I was leaving the room, I felt terrible. I felt this fear. Even if I had no physical body in this state, I could feel a negative, strong presence invading me. And I realized that the focal point of this energy wasn't coming from the thing in my bed. I saw that there were not only just beings in my room. There was this man looking at the creature, looking at the bed, and then looking at me. As I was passing next to him, I felt a strong negative force coming from him. He was tall. He was entirely deep black, like a shadow, but it was visible. He had a large coat on, some kind of headwear. He was just standing there. It was like he had power over the situation. Then, in a quick move, it turned back to see me. But not myself in the bed. He looked straight at me with his red eyes, and made me scream internally, and made me wake up, looking at the wall. But this time, all was gone. I got up, went to the kitchen, to the garden, turned on the TV just to be sure that I was awake. After realizing that all of this was over, I went to sleep in the living room, just thinking and feeling the fear still. And I couldn't think of any other subject. But the fact of that strong negative feeling, I was feeling that. It was the same sensation I felt back in my younger days, when I was seeing the shadow printed on the wall, trembling, just looking at me. This is where I'm going to end my post. I'm going to stop right here. There's a lot more that I have to tell you. I just hope that you'll listen. I'm sorry for such a cliffhanger. I just have to take some time. This is all making me very emotional. But until next time, goodbye. Hello to everyone. Now before you exit the video, I wanted to say something to all of the new subscribers that have joined in the last week or so. I wanted to say thank you and welcome. There's a lot of content that's going to be coming soon, so just be prepared for that. Typically I try to upload about 3 times a week to 4 times a week. I hope you're going to enjoy all of the new content, and for the reoccurring members, hello and thank you as well. Thanks for watching the video, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want more of these, make sure to comment down in the comment section. Make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to this channel and this is your first video, make sure to subscribe. We're blowing up. We're going to take over the world. I've said that before, but we're going to. But other than that, make sure to check out the links in the description as well. My Twitter, Instagram, everything is down there, including my Gmail, if you want to send in your own stories. I would greatly appreciate that. I find it a lot more interesting to upload people's personal stories like my subscribers. So if you would like to do that, make sure to do it. I'm trying to make sure that for now on, I'm posting longer videos, so I can make sure you guys are satisfied until the next upload. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure to go vote on the poll that I just uploaded. Okay, thank you, bye.